Hi, I'm Mandy Grolke, and this is Grateful by Lady Law, where I dive deep into the stories of the connections that have shaped the person I am today. The journey that started in a small town in Texas and led to courtrooms in Nebraska has been filled with life-changing encounters and lessons. Join me as we celebrate the highs and navigate the lows while we explore the rich tapestry of human connection. So today I have my first guest, a very dear friend of mine. I was trying to think about when we first met. I think it was about 2003, 2004.
I had brown hair.
So this is Rick McFayden. You'll learn more about Rick today, but I first wanted to start this podcast with kind of explaining to listeners why I'm doing this, and how I got this list of people, how I accumulated this list of people that you'll be seeing interviews with throughout the weeks to come. So the idea for this podcast kind of started with one of my interactions with some coworkers, and they thought I should write a book, and I just knew I didn't have time to write a book because I've been through a lot of stuff in my life, and you know about a lot of that. So then one of them, the younger generation, thought I should do a podcast, and I thought there's no way I could do a podcast, but here we are today. And one of the ideas that really brought me here today was the fact that throughout my life and all the things that I've been through, I've always had people in my life that have been leaders, mentors, role models, friends, just this amazing support system. And I couldn't have done any of the things that I've done without them. And I really got the idea of that list when I was in the Leadership Academy through the Nebraska State Bar Association. So it's for young lawyers, or lawyers that have been practicing very long. And you have 2 days where it's kind of intense leadership training. And one of the assignments they gave us was to write a list of the people that have impacted your life. And I remember sitting next to this other attorney that I knew pretty well. And he looked over at my paper and he's like, "How do you have so many on your list?" And I had already like 25 people. He had 2. And I remember that very second, I thought how grateful I am to be able to list 25 people who have impacted my life, 25 people who I care about, who care about me, and that I was wise enough to know that these people had provided me lessons to make me who I am today. So I went back and I found that list, and of course you were on the top of it. So that was like 13 years ago. And in those 13 years, so many more things have happened between you and I. So that's why I knew I needed you to be my first person that I interviewed on this podcast, Rick.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So let's kind of get rolling on the interview. Okay. So like I said, I think it was like 2003, 2004 that we first met at Buena Vista.
I think that is correct.
Yeah. I had moved to Texas, or I had moved from Texas here in 2001. I had taken a few classes at Iowa Western, and then I wanted to get my teaching degree. So yes. I know that you probably don't remember it because you interview and meet with tons of students. It was when you were, I believe, the dean at Buena Vista, which is on the campus of Iowa Western. And I will never forget walking in your office and thinking, this guy is so cool. You were there. You were just dressed in a nice suit. You were the dean, but you were so laid back and you were so easy to talk to. And I felt intimidated. I was from a small town in Texas. I never really even thought that I would probably go to college. If I did, I didn't think I'd go to college to do something I wanted, which was teaching. So just the fact that I was in your office, I don't think you know how intimidated I was. But you, within that time that I was there with you, you made me feel like this was something I could do. Like I could be a part of the university. I could get my, degree. And you had helped me so that I could do a bunch of independent studies. I don't know if you remember that too, because I had taken some courses in Texas that didn't transfer up, but you could tell academically I would be able to keep up with an independent study. And that too was huge for me.
One of the things that you mentioned is a natural talent that maybe everybody has it, but they don't all choose to use it, and that is being able to intuit just from a meeting who's there to be helpful, and how do you seek out, how do you identify those people who are truly interested in helping you advance as opposed to helping you for their own purposes? It's really an intuitive thing that you develop, and you had it from the get-go. Right. And I also identified when you walked in, because you're right, I don't have enough fingers, toes, appendages of any sort to count how many thousands of students I have met with in the X number of years I've been doing this business. Of those, a handful, maybe 2 handfuls, have remained close associates of mine because I'm selfish and I didn't want to let you go, because I thought, this is a person who's going to attach herself to a star, and I will be willing to brag about my part in that when she's up there in the stratosphere. And I really wanted to engage in that kind of self-aggrandizement because I'm an old man and I'm getting tired, and I want people to recognize that at one time I had something to give. And I'm delighted, but I need to remind you, you gave as much as you took. So thank you for doing that for me. And you're doing it now by finding it relevant to talk to me.
That's the important conversation. And you actually said a few things that I want to come back to. But one thing I want to do is let listeners know who you are and what you do.
Okay.
So you've been in academics for how long?
45 years.
Yeah. You have your law degree.
Yep.
Correct? And you got that at Creighton.
Yep.
And then where did you go from there?
I practiced for about 10 minutes in Washington, D.C. For the Justice Department. I was in the recidivist criminal division of the Justice Department, repeat offenders, and I was not very good. And that's one of my rare talents, is that I can tell when I'm over my skis pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And I was in a field that I either didn't care for or I didn't understand well enough, and I needed to get out, but I couldn't figure my way out. Unfortunately, my parents both came down with terminal cancer within the first 6 months of my arrival in D.C., and my mother passed away the day before I took the Virginia bar. And that was poor timing on both of our parts. Mm-hmm. And my father then passed away about 6 months after that, and there was nobody left to run the family business. So I packed up everything, moved back to Omaha, took over the family business, which was a bunch of car dealerships and an insurance company and a banking business. And I knew less about business than I did about the law, and I didn't know very much about the law. So I was way over my skis in that, particularly as it came to managing people. Because, and I don't know whether you find this in your practice, but when you're at the head of the ship, people are always trying to find ways to get into your knickers or ingratiate themselves to you through some falsehood or some false representation. And I thought, oh. Well,
and how old were you at that time?
27.
So still young and still figuring out life.
Yeah. And I, again, at that time, that was back in the late 70s, early 1980. The business was a multi-million-dollar business, and I had over 280 employees.
My goodness.
And again, I was plunked in the middle of that, and I had a management team that swore their allegiance and then spent their time behind my back trying to get the franchise holders, like Ford Motor Company, to look at them as more qualified than me to run the store and replace me. But the way we had structured the business, it was not possible for them to acquire the shares unless they bought me out, which sounded at some point very attractive. Yeah. So I then sold the business. And I moved to Nantucket Island, bought a house at, how old was I? Maybe 36, and retired at 36 years old. And talk about the height of arrogance, for God's sake. What 36-year-old thinks that he can retire? And the worst part is there's no other 36-year-olds to play with.
No.
And you're just sitting there thinking, how many books can I write or read? Mm-hmm. Thank God for one of my friends who called me and said, what are you doing with yourself? And I said, I'm just sitting here watching the ocean, which is a nice pastime for about a month. And then it's boring.
Right.
And she said, come back. I have a teaching position for you at Buena Vista University. Our director of business and law had a heart attack, and he's recovering in the hospital, and it's the end of the semester. Just come back and finish the semester for us. So I got it. I packed an overnight bag and a DOP kit, and a razor, and I flew back, got a room in Storm Lake, Iowa. And that may have been the only room in Storm Lake, Iowa. I don't know. But I ended up liking what I was doing. And again, knowing when you're not over your skis and when you finally found something that you might not be the best at, but you're certainly a contender in your geography.
Right.
And it's one of those things, you don't feel it here, you feel it here. This is one of the underrated parts of our anatomy, and that is, if you pay attention to this, you know who's there to help you. You know when you hit your stride. You know when you're doing good for other people. And that was, thank you, Mom and Dad, for pounding into my head. I was here to help people.
Right. And that's one of, you're pointing to your heart, and that is one of the greatest lessons that I've learned from you, Rick. And that is that you, even though you said that, you would like, kind of brag for the stars that you have followed, the students that you've followed, and that you've played, somewhat of a role in their success. I know that you're saying that, but I also know that you are so selfless in everything that you do. Every time you and I meet, there's a different student that you're talking about, a different person that you've reached out to, that you've seen, a little bit of shine, not even a star. And some of them are the opposite. Some of them are people that they might even be in the wrong program, but you help them to get where they need to be. You help them to see them for who they are. But there's always, every time we talk, there's somebody new. There's always somebody new that you're helping, and it's that selfless helping. Because I know when you help those students, you're not looking for anything in return, because you don't get anything in return except that feel-good feeling. And I will tell you that, over 20 years ago when I met you, that's what I felt from you in that room, was that I knew that you were helping me. You didn't want anything from me. You didn't make me feel uncomfortable. You didn't make me feel like, you didn't have time for me. It was all of those things. And your students feel that. The ones that you really touch, like there's several of us, and I could call them all up and we'd have the same conversation about how you've led us down paths because of your desire just for us to achieve and get nothing out of in return.
Well, as you might recall, you wanted to be a secondary English teacher, and I'm going to out you. You were a 4.0 student in your discipline, which was secondary English. And you had some extraordinary teachers in that as well. Mm-hmm. Jean and Jackie Delahant both were instructors. Eileen Eckrich was there, Cheryl Rollins. Yep. All of them are extraordinary instructors with their own litany of accomplishments.
Right.
Many of them are no longer on the planet, but nevertheless, they knew enough to give while they were here.
Yes.
But I remember reading something that you wrote for one of my classes. Do you remember being in one of my classes?
I do remember, yep.
And we used to grade all of the written work blind because I didn't want to have favorites. Mm-hmm. Every instructor I know on the planet does a little haloing where they tend to favor certain students, right, and they might go a little light on the red ink on their papers. And I got to this paper and I thought, oh, holy God, there's nothing, I can't exercise at all on this. It's just perfect. And I read it 3 times. I remember that. And I thought, if I go through something 3 times and I can't find anything wrong with it, this was before the day of AI-generated work, which is all sorts of horse crap as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And I thought, okay, and I remember having you come in and I say, we need to have a chat about what might be possible for you. And I don't know whether it was that day or it was a later day, but we scheduled a meeting for you at Creighton Law.
I remember that.
And I said, and I called because I still had friends there. And I called and I said, you need to take a look at this one because and you need to convince her that this is what she needs to do. And it didn't take very long.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So I was so grateful. And if you're a good teacher or if you're a good person, you know that you're not all that for that person, that person is going to take what you've given them and they're going to go on.
Right.
You can help them by helping to identify alternatives for the path that they're on. And I felt that somewhat about the story that you had told me, that you were self-limiting, and it was a confidence thing. And I thought somebody needs to have the confidence for her and make it happen. And
right.
So it's not a lot of work. It's not. When you recognize somebody that has talent, it really is easy to help them define their alternative. And you could have said, keep your nose to yourself.
Glad I didn't.
Well, I'm glad you didn't too, because you're extraordinary at what you do. But you're extraordinary at it for reasons. We all know the law the same way. All lawyers have the same base knowledge of the legal process and of precedents and of the kinds of things that we have to deal with on a daily basis, whether in the courtroom, out of the courtroom, on behalf of clients, whether they're corporate or individual. I'm aware of the fact that it's in those moments that we start to distinguish ourselves because academically we've all got the same stuff.
Right.
It's the nuances that we provide based on our own personal experience. And your life experience, while tough, prepared you to be empathetic in a way that most lawyers never could.
It's so true. Yeah.
And I thought, oh, my Lord.
Right.
She's going to fall into this like into a down comforter, and it's just perfect. Right. So thanks for proving me right.
You're welcome. And so what you mean by, or, what we're talking about here is just my childhood. So I grew up with limited means in the Texas Panhandle. in a very small school. My parents provided the best they could, but they didn't always make the best decisions, during my childhood. They're completely different now. But that was tough. That was really tough for me. And then I moved to Omaha. And one of the greatest lessons that another thing that you said that was, you have no idea how much this has stuck with me, is when I went to law school, before that interview. So I had gotten the interview or the meeting at Creighton, and I went into your office and you said, I need to tell you something. And I said, what? And he goes, you said, your looks, some of how far you've gotten might be because of your looks right now, but when you go to law school and you practice law, your looks aren't going to matter, and they might even be a detriment to you. And that could not be more true. And having that preparation and knowing, not that I was ever one that was like, oh, I look a certain way, I'm going to get this. But there are times that, there probably were in my past, I, was treated differently. But when I started practicing law, it was completely the opposite. And if anything, I had to work harder to prove that I was smart. I had to work harder to be heard, and I don't know if that's just because I'm a woman or, what it was because of. Yeah, but I actually had to work harder. But every single time I was in a situation where I was being pushed, I remember what you said. You're going to have to work harder. And then I just accepted that I have to work harder, and that I'll prove these people wrong, that that I'm not just what they see, that I can do what, I need to do to be a good lawyer for my clients. So that made a huge impact for me, and I think it really set me up for success.
One of the sort of baselines of that conversation is a disclosure about myself. I am a member of an insular minority myself. I'm a gay man. I have a husband, and we've been married. We've been together. Tomorrow, we will have been together for 30 years. And we were finally able to get married in Iowa, and I got married at the school on the balcony overlooking the ravine in the Arts Center on campus, which was a wonderful, cool day, and I thank Dr. Dan Kinney from Iowa Western for allowing that to happen. That was pretty ballsy back then. That was a small town in Iowa. They hadn't embraced the fact that gay guys could get married. And talk about things that transformed my life is the ability. Again, you don't know whether you want to get married until you get married, but you don't want to be told that you can't.
Right.
And so I had an empathy for people who were female, first of all, and I'm certainly non-threatening because, sorry, I'm looking at the guy behind you. I'm not looking at you.
Right.
And people of color I would say the same thing to them. You're going to have to work harder because nobody's going to think that you have anything to offer, that you're just here to take stuff or give me stuff.
Right.
So once you develop a sense that you're a member of the group, but you're hidden because nobody can tell, well, a few people can tell, but not very many. And, if I slapped on my cowboy boots and hauled out my duck hunting shotgun, nobody would know.
Right.
I could use that and help the people who needed it. A poor little rich white kid didn't need it. They had their own mechanism for getting where they wanted to go. I really wasn't interested in that. Now, there are those in that group who have their own insecurities and can use a push. I'm working with a young man now who is the product of extraordinary wealth in Texas. And being from Texas, you know that carries a special kind of burden.
Right.
Because that's a special spot in hell as far as I'm concerned, but it is nevertheless his home state.
Yeah.
The product of extreme wealth. Father's a judge. mother was the daughter of a cattle baron in Texas.
So he has big shoes to fill. Huh?
Yeah, and they actually had a show on Netflix. I'm not going to give you the title of it because you'll know who I'm talking about, but they had a show on Netflix for several seasons that involved the story of their family, and he starred in it while he was in law school.
Oh, wow.
But he was so focused on that he failed the bar 3 times. And he called me and he said, I don't think I'm supposed to be doing this. And I said, well, I think you're wrong. I think you're supposed to be doing it, but you're aiming at the wrong reason. You think you're supposed to be doing it to help the people who helped you in Texas. I said, you're not. If you spend your time remembering that you're here because you should be helping people who don't have a lot of money, aim at a different audience. And he called me 2 weeks ago and he said, I'm in my truck. I'm on my way. I've accepted a job in Fort Worth. I passed the bar. I'm going to go to work for a firm that is a natural resources firm.
Oh, wow.
And I said, that sounds like oil and gas to me. And he said, no, it's a natural resources firm. It's an environmental firm. And I thought,
perfect.
Okay, he listened to the lesson. And maybe he'll get there. Again, you get to make these choices. You get to say, oh, God, that was a wrong turn. And he gets to do that. But right now, at least he has the opportunity. And otherwise, he would be a bartender in a bar in Omaha, which is what he was doing.
And that would have been a waste.
Oh, for other people.
Right.
Maybe he was having the time of his life. He can go be a bartender in 20 years.
Yeah.
Right now, he's got stuff to offer. And I don't want to see anybody sitting on the couch if they have something to offer. So, but I pick carefully. And I don't tell you about my failures.
That's the wise part.
Absolutely. I'm betting 100% of what I talk about.
So we've traveled the academic circuit a bit together. So I followed you, I will say. So I met you in Buena Vista. And then I remember being at Creighton one day for was it mock trial judging? Yeah, mock trial judging. So this is after I'd graduated. I had gone to law school, was a lawyer now. I was coming back to judge mock trial. So were you. They'll take all the volunteers they can get. And we can't say no. And you asked me, would you think about teaching? I'm now at Bellevue University. And would you consider, teaching in that program? It's kind of going to be the perfect mesh of both of your degrees. And of course, with my lack of confidence, I was like, oh, I can't teach. I don't know. And you're like, Mandy, come on. And I was like, well, maybe I'll try. And that too just opened the door to, a lot of great experiences. I met so many wonderful students.
You were so good.
So good. The face-to-face classes were my favorite.
Mine
These
too.
Interpersonal communications are what's lost in our society, as we talked about just a little earlier before the interview, and just having those face-to-face times with the students was wonderful. I also used them as focus groups on my trials when I was a public defender. It was like the perfect focus group because it was down in Bellevue, and so I had a bunch of guys that were very conservative and women that it was people from the base, and stuff like that. So it was very helpful for me to kind of pull them as a jury. So I don't know if you knew I was doing that in class, but it was so helpful.
It's a very legitimate thing to use as an academic exercise.
Yes. I always tied it into the curriculum, but I got so much out of teaching students, and I followed your lead. I looked for the students that were marginalized or that needed help, that were struggling academically, or were doing wonderful, and celebrate their achievements and push them to do better. And I have so many students that I still have contact with. Thank goodness social media is not all bad, because thank goodness to Facebook, I have, kept in communication with several of them, and seeing them get promotions and jobs and having families and all those things, just, it gives you a sense of pride. And I wouldn't have those feelings if it wasn't for you giving me the opportunity. And then after Bellevue, you went to Iowa Western.
I became the vice president at Iowa Western.
Yeah. And then you reached out to me and said, do you want to teach at Iowa Western? And I said, of course. A little bit different, more online. So for me, it was always harder to engage with the students. And then after Iowa Western, you went to Creighton, right?
I became the associate dean for student affairs and administration, which was a lot of fun until the administration part dealt with the pandemic, which meant I was the only person in the building for over a year.
Oh my
I'd
goodness.
turn on the lights, wander around. It was spooky. You'd wander around the library and you'd think, what the heck was that noise? Yeah, I was the only person around, and I had to set up, because I was the only person in administration who had that level of online experience. I had to set up the online teaching for all of the other faculty and sort of wander them through the process. But I was there for 5 years, and then the administrative part of it sort of got in my crosshairs a little bit, and I was given the opportunity to return to full-time teaching again at Bellevue, and I took advantage of that. And so that's where I am again now.
So one of the things that you always had your hand in so many things, and each of these places that you were working, you had the job title, but you were doing so many other things with each of the places. Like with Bellevue University, I know you've written almost all of the curriculum for all of the online program.
Yeah.
And that was your work ethic was the other thing that just always stood out to me. I mean, every time we'd have a conversation, you were working late. You don't keep normal hours at all.
I don't know what that means.
How you balance it, I have no idea, but you do it. I mean, you're married, you have dogs at home, you have your personal stuff. The other thing that I know about you is you volunteer in the community. Mm-hmm. And I think that too has really spoken to me, that no matter how busy I am, there's also other avenues that we can help people. And that really making sure that you still make time for helping volunteer in our community is really important.
It would have been easy at some point to sort of shrug your shoulders and write a check. Mm-hmm. I don't have time to volunteer. I'll just write you a check and you can use it for however you want, and I'll make my conscience feel better. But I got a real dose of humility. I have a younger sister who has forever labored in my shadow, and it's not because she's not smarter than I am, because she is. Her IQ test when we were in kindergarten together, not together, but different years, she scored much higher than I did. So she's innately brighter, but she didn't receive the same nurturing experience that I did, or encouraging experience. Mm-hmm. About 10 years ago, she refreshed my recollection about community involvement. She started a group called Women of Like Mind, which is a political activist group, and I won't share with you what side of the ledger that falls on, but let's just say it's consistent with my own. But I watched it, and it started as a group with 8 members, and they met in her kitchen, and they volunteered for political campaigns, and they wrote postcards for political campaigns, and they canvassed, and she ended up being a precinct captain for a presidential candidate, and then she became the campaign manager in this state for one of the presidential candidates. And we're talking somewhat ancient history to most people who would be listening to this. So I would say the names, and they'd say, I didn't even know they were president. So, and it was humbling to me to see that she could generate that kind of following, and they expanded, and they've changed their name now, and I'm not at liberty to give you the name of the new organization. mainly because I can't remember it, because I'm not a member, because I'm not a woman. And it now has 8,000 members, and they are statewide, and they take positions on different, like on this, several of the constitutional amendment issues that are coming up on the ballot in November. They all have positions on all of those issues. Again, I'm not going to share what they are because that's not what this is about. But it's not inconsistent with the way I think. I do know that they took a position on the latest legislative session to discuss amendments to the property tax law in Nebraska, and it turned out the way they wanted. So I was very pleased to see that they did some good. They made inroads with a certain sympathetic audience of listeners and speakers who were in the legislature and outside the legislature and policymakers. And again, she didn't go to law school. She was an art major. She worked in a museum in New Orleans as an art major, which, she's going to school, and we all thought, what the heck's she going to do with an art major? Well, you're going to work in a museum, and then you're going to come home and you're going to become a wildly successful activist.
That kind of brings to mind one of, as you know, the last few years of my life have been pretty challenging. I've had some major ups and downs, a lot more downs probably. And there were two significant moments that you stepped up, and without fail. And the first one being the loss of Walt. And I remember having that, the conversation we first had after he had passed, and you were like, my issue is I wasn't sure where we would have his funeral. I knew there would be a lot of people, and you just started brainstorming immediately and saying, here's this, and just the fact, whenever you see a problem, you always go to the solution. And that's, I have a list of lessons that I've learned from you, and that is on it. And that just, it helped me at that moment when, after Walt passed away, I was so low. I was numb. I didn't know what to do. I was like, action seemed impossible. And just the fact that you were like, this is what you need to do. This, it just motivated me. You motivated me in that one phone call. I remember thinking, you know what, this has to be done, and I have to do it right, and I want it to be wonderful. Like if you can have a wonderful celebration of life, but I wanted it to be in a place that was meaningful and would hold the people that I knew would be attending. And just having that conversation with you just changed the trajectory of my mindset that day. And that's why I want to have these interviews and conversations, because there's so many things that people don't know, what the impression you had on me from that phone call. And I think that's important for you. You probably never knew that you impacted me that much.
But I need to just go a little further and explain why. Mm-hmm. I do jump immediately to the solution to the immediate problem. But in your situation, one of the life lessons I learned when my parents were dying, and I had a lot of significance. I had a former partner die of AIDS, and so I get the routine. And the worst thing I don't want somebody to interrupt my grief. Don't tell me how I should be feeling.
Yeah.
Don't comfort me now, because I am raging on the inside, and I want to rage on the outside. So get out the way.
Right.
I'm not in the mood for this. Help me solve the things that you can help me solve. Bring me a covered dish. I'll throw it in the garbage, but bring it to me anyway. And it's that kind of thing. People intend to be well-meaning. Mm-hmm. But generally, those people who are trying to be well-meaning have never suffered that level of loss. And I will say this. I know that the loss of Walt will be with you forever, because that was a once-in-a-lifetime find.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this if there's ever anybody up next, but I'm sorry, they're not. That position is already occupied. Everything else is entertainment.
Right.
And I love that. I love my husband's mother is dying right now
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Lung cancer. Again, the fact that she's 92 enters into the equation because people think, well, people at 92 are supposed to be dead. In my family, that's true. In his family, everybody lives to be 100, and they're vibrant up until the day they just go, oh, I've probably had enough of this. And so we're doing the every time the phone rings thing.
Yeah.
But a call came in yesterday. A text message came in yesterday. It was a blanket text message from one of his mother's caregivers saying that it was a quote, your mother is continuing to be graceful in her journey toward death. That's
beautiful.
And I thought, son, it just shot me right between the eyes. I thought, son of a bitch. That is beautiful. Yeah. And I get it. Mm-hmm. And she has a devout faith. She's a Catholic from an old, we call them Patty's, Irish is Patty's pig. She's that kind of Catholic. Wouldn't do something that countered any of the church's teachings. And she's comforted by the fact that she will get to leave the planet. But I watched my husband read that out loud, and he got to a certain part, and he couldn't read anymore. And all of a sudden, I felt my emotions take over where his were leaving off because he just shut off. When you have that relationship with somebody where you finish, it's not just finishing their sentences, it's finishing their emotion. Mm-hmm. When you meet them halfway and then you help them to the finish line, that's the relationship that you'll carry with you. And what a gift.
Right.
Too short with Walt for you, but what a gift.
But at least I had it.
And you'll have it forever.
Yes. So true.
Yeah, it's the standard. I don't want people to be jealous of you because of that, because nevertheless, he's not here.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that you just have to think, oh, for God's sake, I was so lucky and still am so lucky that I can think positively about every experience that, my husband and I fight.
Right.
We don't fight. I fight, he ignores me, which is the best thing to do.
Right.
But nevertheless, we have those moments where we're not all cozy. But when you're emotionally tied to them and your heart just breaks when they're sad.
Yep.
We're scared.
True. Yes.
Yeah. Fear is the greatest inhibitor of human behavior. It creates anger, which is a waste of energy.
Right.
And it keeps you from doing things that you might be meant to do. Yeah. And when you see it in somebody else's eyes, you want to fix it for them, but this is a path that they have to follow themselves. And for you, that meant helping you find a place for Walt's funeral.
Right. Thank you.
By the way, it was a very meaningful service, so thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. The other issue in my life that you really impacted me, and it was just a conversation that we had when I was going through a lot with a family member that had an addiction, and finding out that I wasn't alone in what I was going through. Listening to what you've done to help people with addiction in your life made me realize that I needed to be present in the person that had the addiction in my life, in his life, because I had always tried to just fix him and send him somewhere to get fixed and then come back. And that doesn't work. But also the lesson that you taught me when you were, sharing with me what you've experienced in your own life is that there has to be clear boundaries, that you need to put probably 100% of yourself into helping someone, but having that boundary and knowing how far you'll go and then sticking to it and having those hard conversations. And I pretty much mirrored what you told me. And to this date, it has made all the difference in the world, in my life, in my family member's life. It's changed his relationships with his kids. It's changed even the relationship with his ex-wife. And so that role model that you gave me means so much to me, just in how to handle with grace the addiction in a family, because you can't ostracize them.
Well, you can.
You can, yeah.
I mean, and people do. When you have a limited number of siblings, and frankly, in you telling me about it, there was a level of confidence and intimacy that I appreciated. But I figured, he's from the same set of loins that she is, so there has to be some residual benefit there. She's not the only one that got all the gifts. He probably reflects some of the same qualities that she has, but something happened. Maybe it was the difference between being a boy and a girl. Maybe, I don't know what. Right. None of my business. And again, that's another one of those. People think they have the answer for when you've suffered from somebody dying. They think they have the answer when there's an addictive person in your house. And many times they don't know from Shinola.
Right. They've never been there.
Yeah. But they sure think they've watched enough made-for-TV movies
right.
to think
interventions. No.
Yeah. Yeah. I had the blessing of interventions in my life. I was a drunk. Probably not a very notorious one, but I was a drunk. Mm-hmm. And I had 3 extraordinary friends who spent a lot of time coming over and saying, "You're a drunk, and you need to, let's find a way to get you into something that will preoccupy you or help you." Mm-hmm. Then they got me to go to, it wasn't an AA, it was a separate private organization. Very helpful. Very helpful. And we had, it was a relatively quick decision on my part. I'd gotten in a bar fight at our lake place.
I can't even imagine.
I would have had to have been drunk because I'd never been in a fight before in my life, and I won.
Props there.
Yeah, the guy that I was fighting was drunker than I was. So
you picked your victim wisely.
And then I tried to swim across the lake.
Oh, my.
Don't do that
yeah.
when you're drunk. No, that's not a good idea.
You're on top of the world.
And I got out of the lake and I thought, okay, that's it. Last time I drank, last time I smoked, last time I had caffeine. Now I've reintroduced caffeine because I'm 72 and I teach early in the morning. And so I need to be awake. The students tend to walk out if you're snoring. So I just decided, to hell with it. I'm going to get one of those things back. But the things that were going to kill me or where I might kill somebody else, I stopped. And it was with the gift from these 3 friends who 2 of them are still alive. One of them is no longer amongst us, but that was a present that they were unaware of the impact, and it really helped. It lent the insight that I needed that, just be there. They're going to addicts try to push the envelope. They always try to see what your boundaries are.
Right.
And see if they can extend those boundaries to include their most awful behavior.
Right. And they always have excuses for it.
I had 2 in my family, and they pushed every button that my mother and I had. But it was never far enough. And I always thought, I have enough love in my heart for people that I am related to give them and that's what I did. I gave boundaries that were clear. and reasonable and attainable. It's not a climb Mount Everest in your bare feet kind of a thing. Baby steps. And once you do that, and they can resurrect their lives, and then you have a legacy. Yeah. And that's the most important. You can win 5,000 cases. Your legacy is you had a wonderful relationship with a man, and now you've helped a sibling achieve some level of self-confidence again. Right. And those are things that I'm grateful that you've had the opportunity to do it, but I always knew that you had it in you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just so grateful for those. Those accomplishments mean more than any case that I've won. Just, to know that I was gifted with Walt and just loved him more than anything. And that's one thing that I can say with confidence. I know when he passed away, he knew how much I loved him. Mm-hmm. And then with my brother too, it's just, he knows how much I love him, and he knows that I will be there for him always. I remember telling my niece, your dad's doing a lot better. And she goes, well, of course he is. He's living with you and you're so strict. Something, at least it's working, right? Yeah. No, but so much of it is his own accomplishment. But I think also just being under my roof, knowing it's a safe spot, and seeing how hard I work, I think really has been a huge motivation for him too. Yeah. We're grown-ups. It's time to get serious about some things. So
right. You can sit on the couch later. There'll be time for that.
Exactly.
I don't know when that's going to be for me.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm afraid if I sit down now, I just won't ever get up. I'll say, somebody go nudge him. I don't think he's living anymore. He's not breathing.
You are always so busy. And so you just started, today was your first day at Bellevue University?
First day at class again. And I shared with you earlier that I walked in and there was this sea of students whose noses were plugged into their telephones. And I thought, I can't do this again. I cannot watch these talented young people, most of whom in my building are involved in some kind of intercollegiate athletics. Mm-hmm. So they're all pretty, they're all fit.
Right.
And they all have their noses in their phones. And I thought, okay, I've had enough of this. So I just started walking around, grabbing phones and throwing them on the floor.
What was the response?
You can predict what the response was. Nobody...
Shocked?
Not necessarily. Nobody said a word, but after I finished with about 10 of them, I said, okay, now that I have everybody's attention, tomorrow I come with donuts. And I said, anyone who speaks before I speak to them will get a donut. This is a Pavlovian training session. You're like puppies. So if you sit on command, you get a donut. If you speak on command, you get a donut. If you're sitting there with your nose in your phone, you don't get a donut. Maybe you don't want a donut. The next day, I'll try cookies or muffins, or I'll come down and sit next to you and make you so uncomfortable you'll have to talk to me. But I said, you can't go through your entire life electronically.
Right.
And yet here we are being recorded electronically.
Right.
So I don't know that that's an enhancement of our society. It has certainly made my life easier. Mm-hmm. I teach online and I teach face-to-face. Would I rather teach online? No, but it allows me the flexibility. If I decide I've had all of Nebraska and it's getting very close, I've had all of Nebraska I can stand, I can move anywhere on the planet and still teach.
Right. And there's a beauty to that.
There is a beauty to that.
But I always wonder, are the students getting quite what they would in a classroom setting?
Where you don't have to wonder. There's research out the gig.
There's no way they could be.
No, because so much. Think about it. In your own educational experience, I learned more. I hate to say this. I hope none of our former professors, and this ought to scare everybody.
Right.
5 of my former professors, 45 years ago, 48 years ago, are still at Creighton Law.
Wow.
And to the best of my knowledge, they're still teaching and still ambulatory.
Right.
But that scares me. I think, my God, when do you get to go out to pasture? But they're still teaching, and I don't want them to listen to this. But you learn more from your colleagues and your interpersonal connections with your classmates than you do from your professors, because they're up there sort of talking headsing, and you're trying to avoid being called on by taking copious notes. You're not understanding a thing. It's the after sessions where you get the translation of what the hell did he say? So I like that part, and we don't get it they don't get it anymore because they don't have that. Yes, they do go and they play sports together, and that's a benefit. But there's a whole squadron of kids who aren't involved in intercollegiate activities, and they're still locked in their machinery. And I think, okay, I'm not going to be such a troglodyte that I'm going to make you leave those at the front of class. But I am going to say, guys, let's try putting it down and making eye contact.
Right. Focus on when it's
art
important.
form, yes.
So I think we're about to have to wrap this up, but that's one of the other things that a huge takeaway from me in observing you over the years is that you are unapologetically you. And you've been in many different academic settings. I've seen you in, outside of work, and you're just you. You know who you are, you know where you stand, and you enter a room and you are happy to see people. You don't enter the room like, here I am. You enter the room and you immediately say, there you are. And that makes such a huge difference to people. But just the fact that, over the years, I've just watched you, and you're just Rick, and you do what you know needs to be done.
I have a baton here, and I'm getting ready to pass it to you, because you're the same person. Yeah. I mean, your hair's a lot longer, and you look better in a dress. But we speak the same language, and that's true. Thank you for recognizing it, because it would either be arrogance or ignorance on my part if it was anything else other than focusing on the other person. And I have gone through phases of ignorance, and I have gone through phases of arrogance, and neither one of them work. So thank you for this. This has been good for me.
It's been wonderful for me, and I hope that it's been great for our listeners. One of the things that I have asked listeners in our introductory session is to, as you hear these interviews, kind of think about the people in your life that have impacted you. Have there been college professors? Have there been teachers from elementary school that have really made an impact on you? And if you can think of anyone and they're still around, reach out to them. That's my call to my listeners and my viewers is, take that step, let them know how important they were to you. That'll have a huge impact both on you to be able to tell them that, and then hopefully on them to realize that they really did matter in somebody's life. Thank you for listening to another episode of Grateful by Lady Law. Be sure to follow this show on all of your favorite social media platforms. Listen wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We'll see you next time on Grateful by Lady Law.
A Huda Media Production.